Sometimes life's greatest blessings arrive through the most unexpected doors. If you've ever wondered whether fate exists, this story might just convince you. Before we begin this incredible journey, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming true stories that remind us of the magic hiding in everyday moments. The beeping of hospital monitors created a steady rhythm as Mark Davidson sprinted down the sterile hallway, his heart pounding against his ribs. His 5-year-old triplets, Emma, Ethan, and Ellie, had escaped during what should have been a routine checkup, giggling as they scattered in 3 different directions. Single parenthood had taught Mark many skills, but corralling 3 kindergartners with identical mischievous streaks remained his greatest challenge. Emma. Ethan. Ellie, he called, trying to keep his voice stern yet quiet enough for a hospital setting. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as he caught glimpses of small shadows darting between visitors and staff. A harried-looking nurse with graying hair and kind eyes pointed down the east corridor with a sympathetic smile. Mark nodded gratefully and rushed forward, his worn sneakers squeaking against the polished floor as he caught a glimpse of Ellie's bright pink sneaker disappearing around a corner. When he turned that corner, breathing heavily from the unexpected sprint, he saw his daughter pushing open a door marked Room 424. His parental instincts kicked into overdrive as he lunged forward, reaching the doorway just as Ellie slipped inside. The door was heavy against his palm as he pushed it open wider, mentally preparing his apology to whoever might be disturbed by his daughter's intrusion. "I'm so sorry," Mark began as he entered, expecting to face an annoyed patient. Instead, he froze, the words dying on his lips. The woman in the hospital bed couldn't have been more than 35. Her chestnut hair, though thinning in places, framed a face that, despite its pallor, radiated a gentle beauty. What struck Mark most were her eyes, deep amber pools that seemed to hold both profound sadness and unexpected joy at the small child now standing beside her bed. An 4-stand stood sentinel beside her, clear liquid dripping steadily into the tube connected to her arm. Despite the clinical setting, a small vase of wildflowers brightened the windowsill, their vibrant colors a stark contrast to the room's sterile whites and blues. "Hello there," the woman said to Ellie, her voice soft but warm, like honey stirred into tea. "Are you lost?" Before Mark could intervene, Ellie shook her head, her pigtails bouncing with the movement. "I'm exploring." "Are you sick?" she asked, her small hand already reaching curiously toward the woman's blanket-covered knee. Mark winced at his daughter's directness. "Ellie, that's not polite." "I'm so sorry about this," he addressed the woman, stepping forward to retrieve his daughter. He gently placed his hands on Ellie's shoulders, ready to guide her back toward the door. The woman laughed, a genuine sound that transformed her tired face, bringing light to features that had moments before seemed shadowed by illness. "It's quite all right. Actually, it's the most honest question I've heard in weeks." She looked at Mark, something in her gaze holding him in place. "Everyone tiptoes around me like I'm made of glass." Something in her expression made Mark pause. There was a loneliness there, but also a spark of something he recognized, resilience, perhaps, or the quiet determination to face whatever came next. "I'm Mark," he said, extending his hand before he could overthink the gesture. "And this little escape artist is Ellie." "Katherine," she replied, her hand cool against his. "Katherine Wells." Her grip was surprisingly firm despite her frail appearance, as though she were determined to maintain this one small act of normalcy. What Mark couldn't have known in that moment was how completely this chance encounter would change the course of his life, and hers. How this accidental meeting, precipitated by a 5-year-old's wandering feet, would become the first page of a story neither of them could have imagined. Katherine had been diagnosed with stage 4 lymphoma 6 months earlier, the news arriving on an ordinary Tuesday that instantly divided her life into before and after. The doctors, with their careful expressions and medical terminology, had given her a year at most. She'd been facing her mortality alone, having lost her parents in a car accident years before and with no siblings or partner to lean on. Her hospital room, though filled with flowers from concerned colleagues and the occasional friend, felt emptier with each passing day as the reality of her prognosis settled around her like a shroud. Until a 5-year-old girl with untied shoelaces and curious eyes wandered in, followed by her flustered father with worry lines etched around eyes that had seen their own share of hardship. Their conversation lasted only minutes before Mark's other 2 children were escorted to the room by a security guard with a bushy mustache who'd found them attempting to ride the service elevator to the roof, convinced it might lead to a secret helicopter pad. Katherine laughed harder than she had in months as the triplets introduced themselves in rapid succession, each trying to outdo the others with increasingly elaborate stories about their hospital adventure. "You certainly have your hands full," Katherine observed as Mark corralled his children toward the door, gathering small jackets and backpacks that had somehow been strewn across the room in the few minutes of chaos. "They keep me on my toes," Mark admitted with a tired smile that nonetheless held genuine affection. Then, surprising himself, he added, "Maybe we could come back tomorrow? If you'd like some company?" The words tumbled out before he could analyze them, driven by something he couldn't quite name, perhaps the way her room felt too empty, or how her laugh had momentarily transformed the sterile space. The hope that flickered across Katherine's face was answer enough, a brief illumination that made her look younger, healthier, more alive than the woman he'd first seen in the hospital bed. Mark hadn't planned on becoming a regular visitor to room 424. He certainly hadn't expected his children to beg daily to see Miss Katherine, their small faces earnest as they packed drawings and stories to share with their new friend. But something about her drew them all back. Perhaps it was the way she listened to the triplets' stories with genuine interest, never dismissing their childish concerns or rushing them through their elaborate tales. Or how she never treated Mark with the pitying glances he'd grown accustomed to as a widowed father, instead seeing him as a whole person rather than a tragic figure. Katherine had been a children's book illustrator before her illness made holding a pencil too difficult, her talent evident in the sketches that still adorned her hospital room walls. On their 3rd visit, she showed the triplets her sketchbook, pages filled with whimsical creatures and landscapes that seemed to breathe with life despite being confined to paper. By the 5th visit, she was teaching them to draw simple animals, her hand steadier than it had been in weeks as she guided Ethan's fingers around the curve of an elephant's trunk. "You're good for her," Katherine's oncologist, Dr. Patel, told Mark one afternoon, catching him in the hallway as the triplets used the bathroom before their daily visit. "Her numbers have improved since you started visiting. Her white cell count is stabilizing." Mark shook his head, uncomfortable with the implication. "We're just keeping her company. The kids adore her." "Sometimes that's the best medicine," the doctor replied, his dark eyes knowing beneath salt and pepper brows. "The will to live is a powerful force, Mr. Davidson. And your family seems to be giving her something to live for." As weeks turned into months, their hospital visits evolved into something more meaningful than casual companionship. Katherine began sharing stories of her life before cancer, her travels through Europe with nothing but a sketchbook and a backpack, her dream of illustrating a children's book series about a brave little girl who could talk to animals, the small cottage by the lake she'd been saving to buy where the morning light would be perfect for painting. Mark found himself opening up about his late wife Sarah, who had died during childbirth from an undetected aneurysm, leaving him with 3 newborns and a grief so profound he'd thought he might never resurface. "How did you do it?" Katherine asked one evening after the children had fallen asleep in the visitor chairs, their small bodies curled together like puppies, exhausted from an afternoon of board games and storytelling. The hospital had long since bent the rules about visiting hours for them, the staff tacitly acknowledging the healing taking place in room 424 that had nothing to do with medicine. "One day at a time," Mark answered honestly, his voice low to avoid waking the children. "Some days, 1 minute at a time. I'd look at them and think I couldn't possibly do this alone, and then one of them would smile or need me, and I'd find the strength somewhere." Katherine nodded, understanding in her eyes that had grown brighter over the weeks of their visits. "That's how I've been living too. One treatment to the next. One blood test to the next. But lately..." She paused, looking at the sleeping children, their faces peaceful in slumber. Lately I've been thinking about tomorrow again. And next week. Sometimes even next month. The shift in Katherine's condition was subtle at first. Color returned to her cheeks, a soft pink that made her look less like a patient and more like the vibrant woman in the photographs her friends had brought. Her appetite improved, hospital food suddenly becoming palatable when shared amid the triplets' animated conversations. The doctors were cautiously optimistic, adjusting her treatment plan when her body began responding better than expected to the aggressive chemotherapy. It's not a miracle, her oncologist cautioned during a consultation that Katherine had asked Mark to attend. But it's certainly remarkable. The tumors have reduced in size by nearly 30%. By the 3-month mark of their first meeting, Katherine was strong enough for short outings. Mark brought her to the park to watch the triplets play, her wheelchair positioned under a shady oak tree where falling leaves created a golden canopy above her. She wrapped herself in a soft blue blanket against the autumn chill, her face turned toward the sun like a flower seeking light. By month 4, she was walking short distances, joining them for ice cream at the shop across from the hospital, her steps slow but determined as she refused Mark's offer to bring the wheelchair, just in case. "Daddy, is Miss Katherine going to die?" Ethan asked one night as Mark tucked him into bed, his small face serious in the glow of the dinosaur nightlight. Mark's heart clenched, the question catching him off guard despite having anticipated it for weeks. He tried to prepare the children for the possibility, knowing Katherine's prognosis remained serious despite her improvements. The doctors had been clear that while her response to treatment was encouraging, the type of cancer she had was known for its recurrence. "Everyone dies someday, buddy," he answered carefully, sitting on the edge of the bed and smoothing Ethan's cowlick with gentle fingers. "But Miss Katherine is fighting very hard to stay with us as long as she can." Ethan considered this with the solemn wisdom only children possess, his brow furrowed in thought. "I think she's fighting because she loves us," he declared after a moment. "And we love her too." The simplicity of his son's observation struck Mark with unexpected force. Love. Was that what had developed between them all? The realization didn't shock him as much as he thought it might. Instead, it settled into his consciousness like a puzzle piece finding its place, making the picture clearer. 6 months after their first meeting, Katherine was discharged from the hospital. Her cancer hadn't disappeared, the doctors were careful to emphasize this point, but it had retreated enough for her doctors to classify her as in partial remission. She moved into a small apartment near Mark and the children, who insisted on helping her decorate with their artwork and hand-picked treasures. A smooth stone from the park, a feather found on the playground, a tiny ceramic elephant that Ethan had saved his allowance to buy because, "It looks like the one you taught me to draw." Their relationship evolved naturally, neither of them rushing nor questioning the bond forming between them. Katherine became a regular fixture at the triplets' school events, sitting in the audience at their winter concert with tears in her eyes as Emma performed a wobbly rendition of "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star" on the recorder. Mark accompanied her to every follow-up appointment, sitting in the waiting room with a book he never actually read, too anxious about her results to focus on the words. They celebrated small victories and weathered setbacks together, creating a rhythm to their days that felt increasingly like family. "I never expected this," Katherine admitted one evening as they sat on her balcony, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink after the children had fallen asleep inside, exhausted from an afternoon of helping Katherine plant herbs in small pots along her windowsill. "When I was diagnosed, I thought my story was ending. I was making peace with it, in my way. I never imagined a new chapter might be beginning." Mark reached for her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture that had become familiar and comforting to them both. "Life rarely follows the plot we expect." "No," she agreed, squeezing his fingers, her grip stronger now than it had been months before. "Sometimes it writes something better." Their first kiss happened naturally, under a sky filled with stars during a camping trip Katherine's oncologist had approved. Neither could say who leaned in first, only that it felt like coming home after a long journey. Mark's heart raced as it hadn't in years, while Katherine later confessed she'd felt more alive in that moment than she had even before her diagnosis. The proposal came from the triplets, who had conspired with Mark for weeks, practicing their roles with solemn dedication. They presented Katherine with hand-drawn, "Will you marry our daddy?" cards during a picnic at the lake she'd always dreamed of living near. The cards were decorated with glitter and stickers, the handwriting wobbly but earnest. Mark, kneeling beside them with a simple ring that had belonged to his grandmother, could barely speak through his emotion. "Even if we only have a short time," he managed, his voice thick with feeling, "I want to spend it as your husband. You've brought light back into our lives when I thought the darkness might be permanent." Katherine, tears streaming down her face, looked from Mark to the three hopeful children beside him, their expressions a mixture of excitement and nervous anticipation. "We don't know how much time we have," she said, her voice steady despite her tears. "But I want every moment of it with all of you." They married in the hospital garden where they'd spent so many afternoons during Katherine's treatment, the space transformed with fairy lights and flowers donated by the hospital staff who had witnessed their story unfold. Her doctors and nurses attended alongside Mark's colleagues and friends who had watched their unlikely love story develop with varying degrees of concern and support. The triplets served as flower girl and ring bearers, their faces solemn with the importance of their roles until Katherine winked at them during the ceremony, causing all three to dissolve into giggles that lightened the emotional weight of the moment. Dr. Patel, who had become more friend than physician over the months, officiated the ceremony at Katherine's request. "In my 30 years of medicine," he said during the service, "I've learned that healing comes in many forms. Sometimes it's through treatment protocols and medication. And sometimes it's through finding something, or someone, worth fighting for." Life after the wedding wasn't perfect. Katherine still had bad days when the cancer reminded them of its lingering presence, days when she couldn't get out of bed and the pain medication made her distant and foggy. Mark still struggled with the challenges of raising three energetic children while balancing his job as an architectural engineer, sometimes arriving at meetings with mismatched socks or a child sticker unknowingly attached to his suit jacket. But they faced each obstacle together, finding strength in their blended family that neither had possessed alone. Katherine began working on her illustrations again, her hands steadier as her health improved. She started with small projects, birthday cards for the children's classmates, sketches of the family for their new home, before accepting a commission to illustrate a children's book about a brave girl facing an illness, drawing from her own experience to create images that were honest yet hopeful. The triplets flourished under Katherine's additional love and attention. Emma, always the quietest of the three, began to show artistic talent that Katherine nurtured with gentle guidance. Ethan's behavioral issues at school improved as Katherine helped Mark develop more effective strategies for channeling his boundless energy. And Ellie, the wanderer whose curiosity had started it all, developed a passion for storytelling that complemented Katherine's illustrations perfectly. 1 year to the day after Ellie had wandered into room 424, Katherine received news that left her doctor speechless. Her latest scans showed no evidence of disease. While not classified as cured, Dr. Patel was careful to explain that her type of lymphoma could remain dormant before reactivating. It was the best possible outcome anyone could have hoped for. "Science can explain the treatment response," her oncologist said, looking between Katherine and Mark with something like wonder in his experienced eyes, "but not the timing. Sometimes I think there are forces at work beyond our understanding." That evening, as Katherine helped the triplets with their homework while Mark prepared dinner, the familiar domestic scene a stark contrast to the hospital room where they'd first met, she caught his eye across the room. No words were needed between them, just a shared recognition of how completely their lives had transformed in a single year. Later, after the children were